Alright everybody, what follows this video is an older video, about 7 minutes long, of Isaac, guy who I expect most of you don't know, coding through the Google Maps API. Now, all the code that he writes in the following video is accurate and valid, with the exception of the fact that he was able to do what he did without an API key. Without an API key. That used to be the case. You could play around with Google Maps and everything was fine. Nowadays, however, things have changed. Google has changed the way they disseminate their API. You can now no longer access or use the Google Maps API without a billing account at Google. And you know, there's I think something like 1,000 free uses of the API per day, which means for a small site or the site for a small business, it might be okay. Certainly for a portfolio site, it might be okay. But we don't want to incur any charges. We don't want you guys to incur any charges. So I wouldn't recommend going down that road unless you have to, or you're very, very committed to having a Google Map on your website. Nevertheless, it's still something worth exploring. W3 Schools has an excellent tutorial. It takes you through all the features of the Maps API and how it works. And I want to take this opportunity to, rather than dive into the Google Maps API, you will get the opportunity to see some other APIs in action in the following videos. Rather than dive into Google Maps, I want to instead break down some of the unfamiliar code which you're likely to see in the future in the following videos. I'm going to prep you for the code which you're going to see and which might throw you off. Okay, one example is in one of the later videos, you will see also Isaac dealing with the Google Books API. Okay, this is an API that allows you to access the full text of the Google Books repository, which is essentially every book on the planet because it's Google. Okay? So what the Google Books API allows me to do is search for books, basically, very, very easily, without having to, let's say I wanted to make a Harry Potter fan page. Makes me uncomfortable just saying that, but if I wanted to make a Harry Potter fan page that had all 7 books, because there are only 7 books, and anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. All 7 books on the page with, you know, a picture of the cover and the title, the author, maybe a brief description of the plot. If I wanted to do that on my own, I would need to write up all that information on my own. I would need to search for a cover image on my own and store them all in objects, kind of like our Zodiac objects, right? If we use an API, like Google Books API, I don't have to do that. All of that data already exists, is already stored and organized in the Google Books repository. Instead, I can just search Harry Potter and display the data which comes back to me. Just pause and think about that for a second, okay? And then try and think about it in terms other than Harry Potter books. It's a big deal. It's a bigger deal than it sounds. It's a bigger deal than I'm communicating. And the reason why it might not feel that way yet is because we take for granted everything that we are able to do with the internet. But I promise no more soapboxing. So, onto the code. Some of the code that you're going to see Isaac write is as follows. Something like function, book search, var search equals document.getElement by ID search.value. Document.getElement by ID results.inner HTML. There's an empty string. Console.log search. And finally, for the good stuff, we get $.ajax. Okay. There's more, but let's pause here. This $.ajax, what does the $sign tell you? It tells you that we're dealing with jQuery. And .ajax is a recognized jQuery method which makes a request to a third-party server. Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And this is all related to the data that is being returned to us from a third-party server when we request something from an API. .ajax does it for us. Remember, this is a jQuery method. So if you do not have jQuery in your project and you try to use this, it will not work. There are ways to do this without jQuery, which you'll see from me in a later video. But right now, we're just going to use this because it's nice and simple and pretty clean. Okay? Now, inside the Ajax method, look at what it takes as an argument. It takes an object. Right? We've set ourselves up so that it takes an object as an argument. And this object has a series of properties. I encourage you all to look up .ajax, look up what it takes as an argument, look up the properties that we can feed into it to customize this request. But I'm going to show you a decent example here. One property is URL. Okay, URL is the actual endpoint of the API to which we're going to make a request. And that is just, as you might expect, a URL. And let's do Harry Potter. Harry plus Potter. Okay. In dealing with HTTP URLs, you're often going to see this $Q equals. That's a search query. Okay. So theoretically, this would be the URL that would appear in our browser if we actually went to the Google Books repository and searched for Harry space Potter. We can customize this. We can absolutely customize this or make our search query dependent on what a user types in, and you're going to see that. But again, for simplicity's sake, keeping it simple. So that's the URL property. This is where we make our request to. Okay. Then data type. This is the type of the data which we want returned to us. And because we're dealing with JavaScript, we want it in JSON format. Okay. And JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So what data type, what type of data do you think is going to return to us if we're relying on a JSON data type? It's going to be a giant object. It's going to be a giant object. Okay, that's the data type property. And then there's, for example, the success property. And the success property is, it usually contains a function which is what will be executed when the success is, when the request is successful. Sorry, I can't talk and type at the same time today. Request was successful plus, well, comma, data. Okay, data is going to be the actual data that is returned to us by this request. So when our request is successful, we're going to see this console log, and we're going to see our data represented in the console. Okay. By the same token, you can have a failure property that contains its own function, does something different. Maybe it sends an alert, but we don't need it. And finally, the most important property in this object, which is the argument of our Ajax function, we have type, and we're going to use get in all caps. Get is what you guys will be using. get is what you will be using. Get is what you will see us using. Get is the type of request. We're getting information from a third-party server. The other most common type you may see at some point is post, but we're focusing on get. Okay, and this is it, really. This is the code for Isaac's Google Books app, which allows a user to type in the name of a book or the name of an author or the name of a series, and that becomes search. That value that they type in gets stored in the search variable. The content of the results element is cleared. We don't need this. That was just for confirmation on his part. And then the way that he had it set up was, rather than Harry Potter here, he concatenated search onto the end of this search query. You would need to format it so that it would actually work here, but that's how he did it. Simple as that. So we have a static URL with one dynamic component determined by user input. Okay, and the API part of all of this is this ajax function. We run an ajax function which makes a request to this URL, requests data in this data type, runs this function when it's successful, and this is the type of request it is. This ajax function is the key. It's the meat for this week. This is APIs. I want to make that clear. What happens when your API request is successful, which means the other stuff that goes in here, that's up to you. That's where you get creative. That's where you get fantastic uses of data and of APIs. All right, so I hope this will help prepare you for the code which you're going to see, and I hope it will help you understand how we're doing what we're doing as you move forward. Again, the next video where Isaac is working on the Google Maps is no longer going to be applicable for you guys unless you really do want to set up a billing account with Google and get yourself an API key. Unfortunately, it's dated, and I would just be careful with that at this point in time. It's still worth watching the video. It is still worth going through the W3 Schools tutorial and just giving it a browse, giving it a look-see, seeing what's going on. But we will no longer be dealing with Google Maps, I'm afraid. All right. Talk to you guys soon.